get paid so little, like maybe like $25,000 a year. Part of their deal is they get comps of everything, like including like these omnibuses and extremely rare things and valuable things. And you have to add that to your annual salary because that's money is money.
These are extra copies above advertised print count. Do they have a secret eBay account that they sort of unload this stuff to help support their income?
They all do,
yeah, they all do. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Swagglecast, a video podcast series where I get to have elevated conversations with influential people in the comic book hobby. My guest today is legendary artist and now writer Chen, whose project Evermind is about to take over the comic book world with its collaboration of actor Daniel Wu. I thought we had a really interesting conversation hearing things from the artist's perspective in how they view the comic book collector. Does he feel weird that people make money off of his work in the secondary market? What he thinks about the variant game, how Signature Series has changed the market for autographs and comic book shows, and what he thinks about the current landscape of comic books and the future of comic book collecting. I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation and the series. If you would, please give the video a like, maybe hit the subscribe button if you want to stay tuned for future episodes. And with that, I give you Chen. All right. Well, I'm with Chen, writer and artist of the soon-to-be Kickstarter comic book, Evermind. Sean, thanks so much for hopping on the channel today.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I'm a big fan of your channel, so I'm kind of learning about the whole collecting world through you. So I'm glad to be on the show.
Yeah, it's cool to kind of have you here too. I'm obviously a big fan of your work. I think people who watch my channel probably know that you did one of my variant covers for my comic book, but I thought it'd be cool to, have a conversation with you here today to talk about, the artist perspective in relation to like sort of the collectible world. Cause I feel like there's a lot of interesting, developments that happen, scandals, if you want to call them that, in the comic collecting space that involve sort of artists and whatnot. Not in a nefarious way, but it always ties them into it. And so it'd be interesting to hear your perspective on it and kind of get a sense of that. But before I really get into that, let's talk a little bit about, this Kickstarter comic that you got coming up, kind of an exciting thing. It's your own book. It's called Evermind, and you're doing this partnership with Daniel Wu on it. And we've kind of been seeing this a lot in comic books, some of the kind of like actor celebrity partnership stuff. How did this project sort of come about, and give the people a little bit of background on it?
Okay, well, I mean, it's a bit of a long story, but I had this one image that I did like maybe 20 years ago, and I put it in a sketchbook and took it to San Diego to sell as a sketchbook. And then some guy came around who was wearing a suit. It didn't look like he was like a regular comic book fan. He was like looking through stuff, and then he saw that one image and asked me if there was a book that was attached to it, or if there was anything more. And I just said no. It's just a drawing. And he kind of wouldn't accept that answer. He's like, well, I mean, can you tell me about it? And there's got to be some sort of comic. Do you have plans for a comic? And I'm like, no. And then he just kind of like thanked me and walked off. But the guy next to me said that he was like one of those Hollywood types that are kind of looking for new intellectual property, because Marvel and DC are kind of spoken for. So they're trying to jump into that whole comics to movie type thing or TV show. I don't know who he was or what he was looking for, but the guy said like, next time you should probably, bullshit a little bit. So that was just like that funny anecdote around that one drawing that happened like 20 years ago. And then I brought it out again, a couple decades later, put it on my Instagram because I just realized, I just remember I had it. And then Carl Choi from 24/7 Comics saw it. And I just kind of wrote a little anecdote about it in the comments. And he said like, well, he liked the image, and he said like, well, do you like, if you had to say something about what it was, could you come up with something? And we kind of played this game. And so I mean, that's how it all started. It's just like, if you had to make a story out of this, what would it be? And I think Carl was kind of very sneaky, because I think he wanted me to do a comic, even though I was kind of out of the whole comic making game. But he said, okay, he kind of took it to the next step and the next step. And then I think it was like months later, it's like, okay, well, we're ready to go into production with this. And it kind of surprised me, because it was, I don't think I would have the courage to do this, just to set out and put out my own, write and draw my own comic. But I think the way Carl did it was like a very gradual upward ramp until all the way to the time it was ready to start. So that's kind of how it all began.
Right. So yeah, it's kind of a different, it's funny you mentioned like the thing about it. It's like, it's different experience, like sort of being the face and like having to roll it out yourself versus like being in the sort of, I don't know, publishing machine or arm of like Marvel or DC and stuff. Obviously, you know, people who know your work, like, you know, you've been in it for many years doing those titles. What's been sort of your biggest difference experience sort of having to do it kind of in this indie sense, like even more indie than say like an Image Comics kind of indie?
Well, the obvious biggest difference is I'm writing for the first time.
Mm.
The other ones, you know, I always had writers for, like, you know, like Chris Claremont or John Ostrander. They would write the story, and I would just kind of draw it. Um, and that's the biggest difference. I'm actually writing for the first time. But I guess the other difference, like, this is kind of your baby. So I'll admit that there was a bit of distance when I was doing the work for hire for Marvel, and you know, it was a job, and you know, I thought I was doing my level best effort and trying to realize the writer's story, try to satisfy the editor, and try to create something great for the fans. But I guess now that I'm doing my own story, I find that I'm actually spending more time, and there's more problems, and the art, there's just a higher standard for it, obviously. And just because your name is on it, you kind of just work until you get it to the right place, and that could take a long time. So
Right.
that's the other biggest difference. Yeah.
Is that been like, is that like, has that always been the case with working for the big two in Marvel? Like even all the way back, like in the 90s when you, I think, started on it and were working on Iron Man, like, has it always been more of like a factory type of comics? And no disrespect, obviously I love Marvel stuff, but is it more like, hey, hitting deadlines and getting stuff out and less like art, if you will? Or has that become something that the industry has sort of had to like adapt to over time, in it being that's like, hey, we just got to get the stuff out, like we got to cut through the noise, we got to sell some comic books. Like what's been your thought of like the publishing side of things?
Okay, well, the way the whole machine is set up, you know, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but I think Marvel, part of their strategy, I mean, everyone wants to put out great comics, but it's also just to like kind of carpet bomb the shelves at the comic book store with products so that they'll kind of squeeze out the competitor. People are going to put out Marvel stuff first, and then, you know, I guess the indie stuff kind of gets squeezed out. Um, so there is kind of it's a big factory. I would do just the penciling, and that's the minimum that an artist can do is the penciling for the book. And sometimes the artists handle the inks or colors. I don't do any of that. So there was definitely like pencil a page and pass it on to the inker, and he passes it on to colors. So it is kind of like a factory. And the fact that a lot of times the story comes from the writer, I have to kind of guess what the writer is going for. Like the world is kind of it's not really described. So I'm trying to you know, draw the world that he's thinking of without drawing myself into a corner and not knowing where he's going to go with the story. So you kind of have to make it a little bit generic, and it is a product you put out there, and it is about like you know, in the end, dollars and shareholder value, and you kind of get that feeling, and you understand it, and it's still an honor to be chosen to work for Marvel. So you know, I'll take it under any condition.
Yeah, yeah, but I guess it's sort of like, this is kind of the machine that exists, and like this is the way it's been sort of streamlined to exist in that kind of pipeline. Do you think that like it can ever change, or is that sort of like where comics sort of need to be for the big two, so to speak?
Well, I would say the biggest part of the machine that affects the artist, um, it's complicated, but you know, they have to weigh like how much they pay an artist and how much they promote an artist, because that costs money too, and um, just getting the product out there. So I know with what happened with Image, I'm not sure. I kind of hear the chatter about like how you promote an artist and you pay them a lot, and you kind of have to get them to stay and then keep them in their place. And the last thing you want to do is an artist to get very big and very good and move on and come out with a competing product. And you kind of do realize that you're part of that machine as well. So yeah, it's an unusual business, and I think if they wanted to create, I think as soon as the artist moves on and writes their own book, I think before they're kind of considered like an illustrator as part of a machine, and then when they go on to writing and drawing their own book, that's when they become an artist. So the artist being created in what I'm doing now. And before I was kind of like a work for hire, just like I did advertising, and that was work for hire too.
Right.
So one thing they could do to kind of get closer to an art form is, pay the creatives more, and then not be afraid to promote them.
Yeah. It's super interesting. I mean, well, speaking of you being an artist and bringing it back to Evermind and the Kickstarter campaign you have coming out, one of the things that I thought was interesting, and I think that people who are watching this would be interested in this too, is one of the tiers is a CGC signed tier. So Daniel Wu, the actor who is kind of his likeness is being created in the main character. You guys have a tier where it's like, you guys can sign it and CGC is going to do a witness for it. And signed books have been something that I've talked about a lot on my channel, and like the machine of having CGC signing events. And my Black Mirror episode is that if these things become so popular and efficient and artists can make so much money doing them, like, does it take away the con experience? Why would Sean leave his living room if you could just sign it, sign it there and not actually have to fly to wherever you have to fly to? I'm curious for you to hear about what you make of, from the artist perspective, like the CGC signed books and like this push of like getting signed, copies of comics and stuff. I imagine that at one point, signing was, back in the day at San Diego Comic-Con, was just kind of nice to interact with fans. And now it's like, hey, let me get that Sean Chen signature on it so I can sell this comic for $50 more. Like, what's your feeling on that market? Or do you have any opinion of it?
Well, my biggest feeling is I never quite understood it. Like I'm was never really a person that even read comics that much growing up. I'm primarily an artist, and I'm not a collector. So it's kind of hard for me to understand exactly what collectors value. So I can't really put myself in their shoes. So I like to draw and I like superheroes. And this is kind of where I fall in terms of careers. Comics is where you express yourself with those two loves. The collecting thing, I suppose if I really loved comics or if I loved anything, I would collect it. But for me, it's always been the creative part of doing this. And so especially as of lately, I've been trying to get into the mind of what collectors value. So it used to be kind of like a love-hate thing, because some of the things they collect were kind of antithetical to what I would value as an artist. But now lately it's become more of a like love, don't understand type of thing.
Right.
So I'm just trying to figure out what they value. And I know you can't really paint all collectors with one brush, because I do know when I'm out in a convention and I meet someone who's buying original artwork or getting signed books, I do kind of ask them, what is it about this that you value? And they get a different answer every time. Like, there are a lot of people who buy original art who think that part of the interaction with me and meeting me and then talking about the artwork and then any anecdotes that we trade and then talking about our families is part of the collecting experience. And you really can't get that just through, CGC through the mail. So, it's all types of things, and I'm kind of learning more about collecting as I go. But I would say like my main issue with it is if the books that have the Marvel stamp of approval are the ones that are valuable. I worked for Marvel like maybe a quarter century ago, so that the Iron Man stuff is that old. So that becomes the most collectible thing with my name on it. But it's also work that I did in another lifetime. And I don't think I was even ready to draw comics back then. And I do feel qualified now, and I'm in a good place now. And the art, I think, looks the best now. This book that I'm doing, Evermind, is my best artwork. It's the writing and everything that I think. But because of its independent project and this doesn't have the Marvel stamp of approval, it's just going to get overlooked. And I get it, but that's kind of the problem I have with collecting, is it prioritizes things that are valuable because of reason,
Yeah. Is it weird? I mean, people I'm sure are familiar with like your work on Iron Man. You did like the Winter Guard team. I remember reading that. That was a comic book that a lot of people were very, very excited about, the last couple of years, some stuff on Nova and stuff. You have some of your original art that is also going to be in the Kickstarter that is, of these characters and stuff. Like, do you think it's weird? Like, what would you, how would you feel if you knew that you had a cover, that your Iron Man cover that you did like back then, and it sold for like, $100,000 today on Heritage, which I don't know, maybe you were pulling $100,000 back then to write a comic book, but would you be like, man, I wish I kind of got a little piece of that? Like, do you think that that's funny? Is it weird to you? Or is it almost make you feel like, man, I better keep some of my original art pages?
Well, I never really thought it was going to be worth that much. So if it does get there, I can only be happy about it. I'm not losing anything, although I'm missing out on. I think Jim Lee talked about the same problems that when he was doing X-Men, when I was doing Iron Man also, as soon as it's done, there's a lot of people who are interested in the original art. So you get asked every day by lots of different people. And then you kind of just like, no, no, no. But then they ask so much. Um, you think that you've done your job of turning a lot of people down. Now it's time to sell it. So it felt like I was holding on to it forever for no good reason. Eventually it sold, but then, um, a quarter century later, it could be worth a lot. And you realize that holding out for that long isn't really that long at all, because Barry Windsor Smith still just kept everything, and he advised me to keep everything. But there are other people who say like, well, you got to strike while the iron's hot. While the book is still at its peak, you should sell the artwork. And I sold it, and I got what I got for it. And if someone else gets 10x for it, that's good on them. But I just
Right.
don't think anyone knows what's going to happen. I guess that's the fun of collecting. So
Yeah. I mean, I think that that's true of even if if you're somebody who buys the art thinking that, well, 10 years from now, it's going to be worth even more. You never really know. So I guess the temptation for an artist is if someone offers you $5,000 after you draw it and you're like, all right, well, I'll just take it, like, why not? That's funny that you said with Barry Windsor Smith. I think he helped you kind of break into comics and stuff, but like, what did he say about keeping artwork? Was he actually telling you like, oh no, like this could be collector one day? Is that what he was actually writing? Do artists talk about this stuff?
oh, yeah, I mean, you have to kind of think of that through the lens of Barry Windsor Smith, and the fact that he thought the rule applied to me too. Thought that it made me feel good that he thought that I would become someone someday. But his thing is like, you don't want to sell it because you'll just kind of flood the market with a lot of your stuff. And then, you can be competing against your own stuff when you're older. And Steve Musarski was the publisher of Valiant, and he told me, don't do any commission drawings at conventions, because, if you're Bruce Springsteen and then, someone, and you're at a restaurant and someone says, like, can you sing for my girlfriend? It's her birthday. It makes you look bad to get out there and belt out happy birthday, because you're kind of above all that. If you want to see the art, you buy the comic. And I kind of live by that because that's what they told me. But then you hear a lot of other people, like art agents, say like, well, you have to sell it because it could go lower and lower in value, and you can always get the money now and invest it. So eventually, I think because there was so much interest and people kept on asking for it, I just felt like, well, I should try to meet the need by releasing some of it. And then, the more they asked, I just have to release more and more because they asked so much. And then before you know it, all my artwork is gone, and it's out there. And I think, I don't regret it at all, because there's no way we could have forecasted that we'd be in this situation where it would be so valuable. This is really something that I don't think anyone could have. When Barry said that you should hang on to it because it's going to be worth a lot, I'm thinking, well, that's because you're Barry Windsor Smith and yours will be worth a lot. But I I'm just like I'm just nobody, and I probably am going to be like a person that does moderately well in comics, and then I'm going to regret not selling it when Iron Man was hot.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I mean, you never know. It might be worth a lot one day. I mean, it would take me a lot of money for someone to buy your cover off of me. I'll tell you that much. It would take a lot of money. Well, let me ask this too, because you mentioned, the unpredictability of what it's going to be and what it's going to be worth. I find this interesting. Obviously, the going back to the CGC thing and getting artist signatures and that whole market, and even doing cons and having this experience of people wanting to buy prints or getting books signed and stuff. And I often wonder, like, if this whole thing is more lucrative for artists to do signed books, or even in today, I almost wonder if it's, as an artist, is the temptation to be like, well, let me just do variant covers, because that's like kind of what people really pay the most attention to, or covers in general. And that's fine. But like, I'm curious from your perspective as an artist, like if if the machine is like, hey, make a amazing variant cover, or just make an amazing cover, and then you can go to CGC and do a signing event and get paid, whatever you can get paid for it. Like, there's not much motivation to do sequential art anymore, is there? Right?
All right.
Like, is it just a creative thing that maybe someone just wants to do? Like, how do you weigh that as like an artist,
Well, there is a big pull to do interiors for me. I think every artist is different. Like I know, like people like Mark Brooks, like you don't really see too many interiors by him, or even like Alex Ross. Uh, but interiors to me are what it's all about. I always kind of looked at the people who do covers kind of like armchair generals. I mean, you're not really in the trenches, and I come to really appreciate the storytelling, and especially now that I wrote the story, I really want to tell it, and I really focus on the reader experience, and oftentimes I kind of give the cover to someone else to do, because like in every book you can have two artists in every book. One person who does all the insides, and then one person does the cover, or unless it's a variant, you can get a lot of covers. Um, but I think I was slow enough that I would have trouble handling both chores. So either I do the cover or do all the interiors. So I would choose to do the interiors, and then someone else like Gene Ha or something they would do the covers for me. And I think Marvel was kind of glad to do that because you get like you cast a wider net. But I think it's kind of sad when there's an artist that chooses not to do interiors, because that's really where the art form, that's where the poetry is, and that's where that's like a person who made a movie or wrote a book, but basically the guy who did the movie poster, or the guy who made the dust jacket cover.
Right.
So, and I say that with I'm a guy who stopped doing interiors for a while. I left the business because I couldn't make it work. I wasn't fast enough, and I always had trouble meeting deadlines, and it just wore me out. So in a way, it broke me, and I left for advertising. But I'm back doing interiors again because I think it's just so creatively rewarding. And the covers, I don't find the same kind of. It's a different type of creative rewarding, but I kind of have to do at least both, if not just the interior.
Right. Yeah, it's a very interesting thing, and I think about like the business of comic art and how it relates to collecting and what people value and stuff. And so I'm always curious to hear people's perspectives on that and ask your questions. There's two things I also want to ask you about, and I bet people would want to hear about this from your perspective. Two sort of controversial comic collecting little scandal things that happened. And I don't know if you've heard about either one of these, but I'd love to get your take. Well, so one of them was a retailer comic cover by Gabriel Dell'Otto. Long story short, I'm sure people are familiar with it, but in case you're not, it's basically it was a retailer variant that a retailer put out with his artwork on the cover. The retailer thought that it was original art, ended up not being the case. It was like something he recycled 15, 20 years ago. And that was what was put on the cover, but it was on a book over in Italy or something like that. And the collecting world went crazy for this, right? Because in their eye, it was like, this is a big scandal. Like, it's not original comic art. And the retailer took a lot of heat for that because one, maybe he should have done research, or he should have known, or Marvel Publishing took some heat because it's like this got past them. Maybe Gabriel Dell'Otto took a little bit of heat because he knowingly reused art, or nobody knows actually how it transpired, but it happened. I guess my question to you with it is, I think there's an argument from the artist side where it's like, okay, hey, Sean, we need some deliverable for this comic cover coming up. Can you send something? And in your mind, it's like, all right, well, here, I drew this, once upon a time and it's never really been used. Here you go. Or, so I could see the temptation for that. But I think from collector side, they're thinking they're going to get something new and unique and collectible, so to speak. What's your feeling like sort of hearing that story? Or like, have you had any experience with that? Or what are your thoughts on that? Or like, should you even care what collectors care about,
Well, I guess the biggest difference is whether it was published before. And you said it was for an Italian publication, so it was kind of published before. But a curious thing though, like, and when I'm trying to understand like the mind of a collector, and I am trying to understand because I care. Yeah. But a long time ago, someone asked me to do a commission of Iron Man, and I get asked this all the time. One person didn't have enough money to pay because he forgot and didn't have enough. So he says, like, I'm just going to have to not take this commission. So I had this Iron Man that was a pre-commission, and it was a really nice Iron Man. And then someone else came up to me at the show, kind of toward the end, and said, like, well, can I get a commission of Iron Man? And I was like, oh, perfect, because if I were to do one at the show, it's not as good if I did it at home. Also, there's not that much time. It's going to be a little bit rushed, and I think I was thinking, like, for your money, this piece right here, it's exactly what you want, and it's better than it would have been. So I think it was just going to be a win-win all the way. But he didn't see it that way because, like, he took it and he paid for it, and in general he was happy with it. But I think there was a little bit of disappointment, and I think it was because when they order a drawing, they like to have the feeling that you drew it for them.
Yeah.
And I took a while to wrap my head around that because it did seem like a win-win all the way around. But to him,
Right.
it's something different. I have to understand that these things are very personal. So yeah, I think that idea of and this happens too when I'm drawing comics. If you try to reuse a panel, like story-wise, this image that I did before from another issue fits in perfectly, and it would save me a few hours. But the whole thing is it fits in perfectly. But then if someone sees, like, oh, you reused a piece of artwork, that's kind of like what they call, like, the demonstration of low value, and that kind of like taints you. So I can kind of see, yeah, people pay good money for these variants, and it really should. I think they want to feel like you put in some sort of effort.
Yeah, I think that that's fair. I mean, I also think it's fair to say that when they buy it and they think this is there's a term in collecting, people say it's exclusive, right? It's exclusive for this San Diego Comic-Con, right? It's like artwork that has only been created for this con. So it's branded as being new and collectible and unique and rare. And I think people maybe just got really upset over the reuse of it. Now, in fairness, I think there's also people that, in acquiring that rare thing, I think they would be lying to themselves a little bit if there wasn't this little voice in the back of your mind being like, well, maybe I can sell this for twice as much later on. So there's that. And I think what probably hurts the collector side of it is that once you realize, hey, this has been printed on another book, all of a sudden that whatever the perceived value of it that you bought it for is tainted or it goes under. And so there's a weird, when I really think about it, there's this weird sort of like relationship between like the artist and the collector and the finance side of it, because in a weird way, I'm making money off of your work by just sort of being a retailer who's sort of like juggling this stuff. And so I don't know, maybe that's okay. Maybe that's fine. And maybe it's actually something that is honorable or maybe might feel good, but it's just a funny thing. And I wonder if as an artist, does it behoove you more to think about the collector side of it? Like, obviously you don't want to get in your head
Well,
about doing stuff, but
I think a good parallel would be like with the stock market. When a stock goes up and down, it really has nothing to do with the intrinsic value of the companies. It's basically people's emotions over it. So a lot of times, if the CEO is sleeping with someone, or something is said negatively on a talk show, and the stock plummets, like, that doesn't really have to do anything with the bottom line of how much they're going to bring in.
right.
So I understand that, like, collecting is also, it's a highly emotional thing. And
Yeah.
those things, it do have to be respected. You can't just say, like, oh, you're not thinking with your brain. You're thinking with your flawed heart that's tainting everything. Everything is emotional. So we do have to respect it. And so if they want me to the evidence that I put in my hard work, blood, sweat, and tears into this piece, and it's to the best of my ability, and I wanted to give them something new. I think it's up to me to deliver that and not question their motives. So.
Yeah, it's really interesting. A story that happened kind of came and went, but we'll be curious to see if something like that ever happens again. All right, the other interesting artist scandal thing, and it's not really even a scandal, but I wonder what you think about this is, so obviously rarity is like a big thing in the collecting space, right? Like if I have a comic book and it's a variant cover and there's only 100 copies that exist of this, then that might shape what I perceive how much I'm willing to pay for this comic book. So it's recently become more known that there are advertised variant print counts, and then there's artist copies. So you may work on an image book and it's the Chen 1 in 100 cover, and there's only 100 of them that exist. But Image might also say to you, oh, Sean, here, hey, here's 20 copies, and you can go to New York Comic Con and sell them or whatever. And this kind of happened where there was this very rare variant. I think it was on 8 Billion Genies, and Charles Soule is the writer of it. And he went to a con, and he, at his table, brought out these like variants that were like not supposed to exist, or they were supposed to be rare or have like a limited thing. And the store that sold them, like they sold out of them. So in theory, he shouldn't have any copies. And what it later came out to be is that as Image, I think as artists, you guys have options to print more of the stuff you've worked on, or however it works in the back end deal and that sort of thing. And it was a little bit of a thing, and a little bit of a controversy. And I'm curious what you think about that. Like on the one hand, I can empathize with like an artist perspective. Let's say you got, whatever, you did your Marvel cover and you got paid whatever your going rate was for, a cover work at Marvel. I don't know. Let's say smaller artists got paid whatever $500 and did a variant cover, and then that all of a sudden this comic is selling for $1,500 or something, your artwork, and you have the chance to sell some copies. Like I can understand why you would want to do that, but I'd throw it back to you and just hear like what do you think about this, or what's your experience too with like printing out old of
Okay,
your
well, I can tell you some
work?
funny stuff about that. I didn't know that they. I did receive comps in the past. I didn't know there was kind of a. Is it illegal to sell them? I guess. Or
I don't think it's illegal.
okay.
I think it's just the thing where it's, I think it's expected you would get some comps for your work, but
Right.
if it's advertised as like a rare variant and then you got comps of that, then
Right.
maybe there would be collectors who would be, hey, what's up with that?
Yeah, I but not being a person that is very wise on what's collectible, I would get comps of variant covers that I've done, and they would send so many. I would just give them all to my father-in-law, and he would take them and just put them out on the table in his assisted living facility. And that's where all the comps that of variant covers, that's where they all went to, and they probably just got trashed at the end of the week. I just didn't know they were valuable. But I know I'm doing this card set for, I think it's Fleer, for Marvel, like a Spider-Man set, and it paid so little to do a sketch card. Not that much money at all. I'm like, why would I do this? And then someone told me, because they're going to give you, they say they're going to give you APs. I was like, what's that? And they're just extra cards that you can draw on your own. And I was like, okay, so what do I do with that? And he said, well, you draw on it. Maybe you draw the best Spider-Man on it, and you could sell it, on eBay or at a convention for a lot of money, and you kind of fold that into how much they're paying you. So you have to take that into consideration, and the fact that that's the major consideration whether you want to do this project or not. And
Wow.
I thought that's so weird. Like I don't understand collectors. I've been like giving away my variants to people who don't want them and stuff. So yeah, I'm just still learning all this. And yeah, I mean, I also used to make vinyl toys, and I couldn't make enough of them. People kept buying them. I didn't really know. I didn't think to keep any for myself because people wanted so many of them. It takes so long to paint each one. That every time someone asks, like, well, I was going to keep 10 for myself, but then 50 people are asking. So I would just kind of sign them and give them all out. So I would see them going for a lot on eBay. And I don't have even one of them on my own. So I'm, it's just being very naive about, I don't collect anything in my life.
Yeah.
So I don't collect cars or, and like stamps or anything. So this is all kind of very new to me. And just being at the center of, from a creator's perspective, I'm probably not a good guy to ask because, you can swindle me very easily.
No, don't do that. When you go to Sean's table, pay his asking price on all those collectibles.
I find that I think someone told me that I have a reputation out there of being the guy who would charge the least for commissions, whose prices haven't gone up. Also, a guy who ends up giving away a lot of artwork. I've given away tons and tons of artwork for promotional things, or and yeah, that's in a way I kind of prefer that, because if I was to get too wise as to like what something is really worth, I don't want to be a guy that hangs on to it and then you have to like until I'm bare knuckled because I know it's worth money. So
Yeah.
at this point, my work gets out there, it makes people happy. I uh, and also another thing I might add, like one of the things that was being collected most recently by me that I did was a little custom comic I did for Marvel in conjunction with Northrop Grumman, and I think they were handed away for free at the near Comic Con maybe a few years ago. And I think there was so much backlash about it because Marvel was kind of in cahoots with Northrop Grumman, which is a defense contractor, and that project went sour really fast. And then they kind of pulled that whole project, but a bunch of them did get out, and now they're going for a lot of money on eBay, and all the requests I've been getting is like, can you do you have any copies? Like, do you have the cover? We would like to buy the cover. So all these collectors are kind of like were kind of hounding me for something because of something very negative, a big black mark on my career is the most valuable thing that they want from me. Yeah, if it embarrasses me, if I get canceled because of it, it doesn't really matter because they got something valuable because it's just so rare.
Well, yeah. Well, in the comic market, these controversial books that aren't necessarily desired because of, say, the art fidelity, it's like some controversy, like can definitely be high demand.
Yeah,
Like
I
even
totally get it.
you know,
But I just thought that negative cloud over it and the damage it could do to me because of my connection with it is something that they could profit off of, and
yeah.
that felt kind of weird. So there's always been very good experience with creators and some very like questionable ones. So.
It's funny. I want to go back to what you said, where you were doing the sketch cards or the Marvel cards or whatever, and they're giving you these things, and it's almost like baked into your salary in a way that
Yeah.
you have the potential to sell these comics. And it's almost related to, like, say, that variant cover that I talked about where like 8 billion genies, because it's like, yeah, I don't know what the off the top, like what the going page rate would be for, say, like an image title like that. But let's say, some writer got paid, whatever, $2,500 to write a comic or something like that. And all of a sudden, hey, here's like 30 copies of this variant that are selling for $50 a piece. Like, you can make more money just selling this comic than what you got paid for, to write the comic. And it's an interesting thing. And I almost wonder, like, it's almost like a model where, like, if let's say you were working in a restaurant and like you don't get paid a lot to actually be, say, the bartender, but where you do get paid is for all the tips and stuff that, people are going to give you. Like, is that something that you think sort of needs to be in the model of the comic world, as far as like what is sustainable and how artists and writers and creators can make a decent living? Like, what was your thought on that?
Um, yeah, it is a bit strange because like this business doesn't work the way you think it would. So I just wish there was a little bit more transparency and just a little bit more kind of instruction out there as to like when you forecast how much you will get for doing a piece of artwork, just so that how much you will be getting, because it doesn't really work out because of the base pay, because like money is money wherever it comes from. And in comics, it seems like in comics more than many things, it can come from the strangest places. And that's just understanding the mindset of a collector. And also it's kind of bad on the industry that something like that's so considered like kind of minor like that can upend your salary. I mean, your salary, you should get paid a decent living wage.
Right.
And I think all this stuff happens and people and artists exploit it because you don't get paid too much on your base salary. So like I know with some of the comic book companies, especially the people who live in New York, their assistant editors that get paid so little, like maybe like $25,000 a year, but they get comps. Part of their deals, they get comps of everything that comes from that they publish, including like these omnibuses and extremely rare things and valuable things. And then they would take that to the Strand or Jim Hanley's universe and get money from that. And you have to add that to your annual salary because that's money is money.
Yeah.
But then like Marvel or DC would kind of clamp down on it and say you're really messing with the rarity of these things because you're kind of selling out the back door. So they're gonna tell you, well, you have to take it home and keep it. You can't give it to someone, and you can give it as a gift, but you can't sell it to a store. Like, and then they will say like, well, then you just have to pay us more. And it's just like a very strange. I don't know if this happens in healthy industries or whether this is happening because comics is kind of
Yeah, well,
exploitative sometimes.
it's such a good question. It's such an interesting thing. It's like, is it feels like it shouldn't work that way, but in the collecting side of it, in the secondary market world, like these stories always become interesting things. Like whether it be like, like some associate editor at Marvel gets every variant cover, and kind of what I was saying, where it's like, these are extra copies above advertised print counts. And then like, do they have a fake or like a secret eBay account that they sort of unload this stuff to help support their income?
They all do,
they all do. See, dude, this breaking news, this is like huge. And I think in the collector space, they're always, maybe people are shocked by it, or, a lot of it is like pearl clutching, but it's also sort of like, what do you expect? I mean, this is going to happen. Or even at CGC, there's stories at CGC where, let's say you'll do a variant cover, and now CGC will help destroy copies in order to create print counts low. So long story short, if you do a variant cover with Marvel, maybe this stuff, you have to order 3,000. Like that's their minimum amount of copies. And a lot of retailers are like, oh, well, what if I did my own variant cover and I destroyed 2,500 of them? And so now there's only 500 of these covers that exist, and CGC is helping them destroy it. And there's all these people thinking like, you don't think that there's employees who work at CGC who get paid $10 an hour and take a few of those extra, like for themselves, so it feels like this stuff happens a lot. And like you said, is it the mark of an industry that shouldn't quite be working that way,
Right. But on the other hand, the amount we get paid to draw a comic is not that much. So if are these other ways of getting paid, that's great. I think if someone can survive doing just covers, you can do covers a lot faster than interiors, and then also it becomes more visible. Like I think a lot of people don't read comics at all, so doing the cover it's a lot of bang for your buck as an artist. Like I think it's a smart thing to do, and I'm glad that that there are artists out there who can make a living doing that. So yeah, I think it's strange, and I think my problem is just not being very wise. I see like artists who are very good at this stuff, and they can play that game, and they can really capitalize on their time drawing. I was kind of a bit naive. It's kind of just learning about this now, and there's so many things I could have done a lot smarter, but it is what it is. But I think it's just anytime we can get an income stream from and just capitalize on the amount of work we do, I think is a good thing. So
yeah. I mean, if anything, I think the relationship between artists and the collecting side and the retailer space and stuff it's actually a good one. I think it can help a lot of artists, as it can also help, whether it be from like a revenue financial side, but also, understanding what the collector wants and all these things. I think a lot of this stuff is a good thing altogether. If more of these, what do you call it, disparate sides of the hobby understood each other better, I think actually they could service each other. Kind of switching up a little bit, talking about, artists and comics and stuff. I always like to ask about this question, especially you as an artist. What do you make sort of the future of comics and where we're going and publishing, and then maybe a little bit like the whole AI craze and where that's going? And I don't know if you spent much time like looking at it or studying it, but how do you feel about that? Do you think there's going to be a place where Chen will use AI to assist in your creating, or is it going to just, are we all going to get replaced by robots? Like, what do you feel about it?
Well, I hear a lot of artists talking about it, and there are people who hate on it because they emotionally want to hate on it. I didn't really know what AI art was, a year ago, but there was all this. I'm on Instagram a lot, and I just kind of look through a lot. And every time there's an image that really strikes my fancy, I would like it or save it, and I would realize that there's some images that I saw that really blew me away. And it's like, wow, this is how I want to draw. I just can't get there yet, but I'm going to save this. I'm going to learn from it because this is exactly the style and this level of draftsmanship is unreal. Like this is a fantastic painting. Like how can you get a painting that's so accurate? And it has all the best of what it needs to be if it's of a painting. And I had a whole bunch of those saved up, and then someone told me, "Oh, this is all AI. That's just a photograph with a filter on it." And you're supposed to hate it. I was like, well, I don't hate it. It's still, honestly, it's great stuff. I mean, a lot of the stuff that AI has been putting out, I'm probably alone in thinking this, but it's impressive what it can do. And I aspire to be as good as some AI art is in some ways. But I think it works well in very certain parameters, like very narrow parameters. Like I think people were talking before, like about a driverless cars, and it didn't get adopted as much as we thought it would because in general it works, but then in pinch situations it doesn't work, and if it doesn't work in every situation, it's not a viable thing. So I think AR is very good at certain things, and it'll show you the best of what it can do, and people will show you the best of what AI can do for them. But I think it's very hard to make a comic out of it, and so that's from the writing side. I mean, the drawing side. From the writing side, I think AI. Now people say that it's going to take over what the writers do, and I think a lot of that comes from just not like people already don't understand what writing is completely, because a story that's written is just like a scene of a chain of scenes that are put together, and that magic sauce is kind of invisible. So when you see like a great story, you can say like, well, a computer can do that, or I could do that because I can string together some cool scenes. But that's really not a story, and it's really hard to tell the difference between something that a good writer has control over and something that's just like a random jumble of scenes. And it's really hard to tell the difference, except that one can bring you to tears or make you really happy, and the other one is kind of boring. And that thing that makes it emotionally satisfying is something that's I think intrinsically in humans, and you have to have evolved as a human to kind of understand exactly what that is. You have to be like a great writer. So I can spot great writing, not just because of how it makes me feel, but just I can see the nuts and bolts of what the writer was trying to do. Doesn't mean I can do it. I mean, I'm trying to do it, but I mean, at least I can recognize it. And if people think that some algorithm can take over that, I just think it's really naive. This is what you're thinking about the driverless cars, where you see it go down certain streets and you see it in certain neighborhoods and isolated in the straight freeways. But then what happens when it rains, and what happens when it's dark, and what happens when it's in a country where the street signs and street markings look a little different. All of a sudden it's not viable anymore, and then lives are at stake. So I think in both cases, AI can do great things with writing and great things with art in a certain range, and that range is always widening. But as the demands for art in comics, you have to be able to draw everything, including hands. And then with writing, you have to be able to understand what it is that makes a string of scenes a story, and what just makes a string of scenes. And that stuff, I don't think there's just no way that any type of AI can figure that out any day soon, or even ever.
Yeah. No, I think I agree with you. I mean, I'm someone who I think eventually, maybe it can figure it out, but it feels a little ways away before I think an AI script can really understand like themes and tones and that sort of thing. I think it can probably piece together like building blocks of what successful movies or comics can do, but as far as really taking that next level, and coming out with like a Christopher Nolan type of script. It's probably a little ways away,
I was just listening to a master class about like one of the things that people like writers do is like you raise the reader's curiosity, and then you satisfy that curiosity with information that they're looking for. And if you raise too much curiosity and don't give them answers, then they get confused and bored and frustrated. But if you kind of raise a question and answer it, and answer every bit of the curiosity, they become bored. So you as a writer have to have your instincts for all the different types of people out there, from all different IQs and different age groups and from around the world, to kind of get the best idea of when should you raise their curiosity and how often should you satisfy that curiosity with information. And the ratio is roughly about 2 to 1. And so this is something that really a computer can't do, because it doesn't really know these thresholds of am I making the reader curious, and am I giving them the answer at the right ratio that they would continue to read long past their bedtime, or just continue to read when the book is so big. And if you kind of do that kind of carrot, I don't know whatever that thing is, where you kind of like string carrot theory. If you do it just right, you can string along a reader and emotionally satisfy them in a huge book that's the size of a phone book. And that really is just basically your instincts as a person who's lived a life, and knowing what you and your friends and your ideal reader would like to see. And that's not really a computer thing, you know?
Yeah. It does feel like, that's the writing side. And on the art side, it's, it feels like, maybe AI art right now can pop out a really great variant cover, but the sequential art side of it feels still like it's very difficult. And if you can do it, it almost feels like at this point, I mean, the amount of effort and prompting and revising and reprompting and revising and reprompting and all this. I mean, I've watched videos on this, it's like the amount of craft that it takes just to do sequential. At that point, it's almost like, well, I mean, you just hire someone to do it, it's, or hire someone to draw it, it's got to be, it feels like maybe the sequential art is quite a ways away before it's a few clicks of the button. And then it's truly outpacing what the pipeline is for regular art.
I think when people read a comic, it's a very specific thing that you have to draw. And I think a lot, even with this Kickstarter, they'll ask, like, can you draw someone's face in there? Can you hide this element? Like, I want to give this away. Can you put this in your story and draw it? Like, no, you can't, because everything you're drawing, it's a very specific thing. You just can't throw anything in there. And I think when a reader is reading a story, they think that it's not necessarily a very specific thing you're drawing next. But, we have this image area the size of a baseball card. That's the end product of the panel. And what goes in there, the rule is exactly what you need to see, with room for word balloons. And then everything else that you put in there starts to detract from the readability. So like, you have to determine like whether I need to see a close-up of this person's face, because one raised eyebrow is important. And I have to put that in the center because that's where they're going to look first. So that has to be seen there. And if I put, there's going to be a crowd of people, but if I face the people so that they're looking off to the left or the right and not necessarily to the front, then that way they won't be distracting. And then my character has hair that parts on one side, so it covers one side of her face. So I'm going to show her from the side where her face is showing. All those things, these considerations, like every artist that's drawing a comic is making like 50 to 100 decisions for every panel. And it's mind-boggling what goes into it. And we kind of just do it intuitively after a while. But I don't think a computer algorithm can think. I mean, they're very good at looking into a past to draw something. But as a comic book artist, we're also working into the future and to determine what we draw now. Like if that person has the part on the left side of their face, I have to draw them from the right side, or if I have to draw them from the left side, I got to make sure to play up the body language, because you can't see the expression in the face. Like, I don't know if a computer can figure that out, but that's really something that a lifetime of experience for me, being a human being, that makes it possible. And then that none of that is apparent to the reader. because they could think that maybe no decisions are being made or very simple ones, but really there's like 50 to 100 very difficult decisions to make that work forward into the story as much as backwards. And I think AI can really just work looking at what was done before.
Right. Yeah, that's fair. No, I think that's a good point. And it's definitely, easier. I think everyone can see like, yeah, like, okay, in the future, this can be a thing, but it still feels like it has a lot of work to go. And even just the prompts themselves are still very difficult. I do want to kind of ask and finish out just with, were you gonna say something?
Oh, no, I like to put up pictures of my hands that are really bizarre looking, just so that there's so much hands out there, but just to put one out that confuses AI is kind of cool. Like if I keep if I encourage everyone to put out galleries of their hand in weird contortions, so that just takes them longer to solve that puzzle. So
yeah, that is funny you mentioned that, actually, because like you'll notice like in the AI variant covers that come out, it's like they're like 97% there, and then you're gonna look and see like their fingers are all weird or something, and yeah, it feels like the machine is having issues with some of those things. So yeah, that's a way that you at home can fight the robot gods by taking photos with weird hand positions. Well, let me finish out with this. I again, going back to Evermind, you got the Kickstarter kind of going out soon. I'd like to just hear your thoughts. Like, I mean, just as far as like comic industry, where new comics are and stuff, a lot of people always kind of throw out this idea of like, oh, comics are dying and this and that and whatever. And there is a lot of, I could steel man some of those arguments and understand where some of that stuff is coming from. And I do think that there are a lot of pain points in the kind of new comic industry. Yet there does seem to be a lot of successful crowdfunded indie comics going on. I think people are excited about crowdfunded comic books, whether it's because they're invested in the people making them, or they like the story, or maybe they're just excited to get something that is coming from more of an auteur, or like it has like a, even maybe it's just the printed material is nicer than what a lot of the current printed material is. What's your sense from a creator standpoint where comics are going to go from here? Do you think you get the sense that a lot of your colleagues and stuff are, if they could wave a magic wand, they would also just do sort of creator owned comics and self-published or crowdfunded stuff? Is that where most people want to be? What's your thoughts on that?
I think for an artist, there's probably two barriers to entry. Like I know one of my friends who works for Marvel. After you get to like about 50, it's kind of weird to be working for Marvel when you're up there. But part of the reason is the low pay kind of keeps you beholden on staying on that hamster wheel. So if you were to take a year off and do your own comic, there's no guarantee that it's going to do well. And you're just better off just continuing to do Marvel and DC stuff, because at the higher levels, you can get paid pretty decently. And the work is relentless, and you can't really get off to develop your own thing. So financially, it's hard to break away from that. And then the other thing is, I always thought that people had ideas, like ideas are everywhere. But someone told me that a lot of times artists don't have really good ideas, or they have one that's kind of percolating. But then when you start to actually get down to the nuts and bolts of actually writing it out, chapter 1, verse 1, that's when they kind of put it off for later and just continue doing their Marvel and DC stuff. So you do have to kind of rip yourself away. I ripped myself away from Marvel. I mean, I think after I was in advertising for so long, I wanted to see whether, my phone rang, and then someone from Marvel asked if I would help out on a book. And I was like, wow, okay. I didn't expect that to happen, because I don't know which of these editors still know my name. But and that little project led to a lot of cool stuff. Like I think I was slated to do a Star Wars book. But then, that's when Carl wanted to do this, and I had to make a decision, like, should I go creator own? Or I felt like I was on the beginning of getting back in Marvel, and then had my name built up again, and have my commissions and original art worth a lot. It may take a few years, but it will get there. It was starting to. but I decided it's probably better to kind of to go with Carl and do my own IP. And that was because, you know, I had a huge royalty check back in the 90s that I didn't squander, and it grew in investments and stuff. So I had the luxury to be able to step away, and, you know, I can take a few years off and develop something and not have to worry about putting food on the table. So I was very fortunate for that. And I think more people will do it if there was a system that guaranteed that they can make a living wage. And for Kickstarter, the things that help, if you're a big shot in some other industry, like if you're well known and you put out a comic, people will buy it because you have a fan base. And the other thing is, if you're a leader of some kind of ideology, um, then you can kind of mobilize an angry group of people and get them all on your side. That's another way to do it. And the other, I think the way, I'm neither of those. So I think the way that I have to do it is just put out the you know, people kind of know me from drawing, to do the best drawing that I have ever done. And then also, because I have no experience with, and they don't know me as a writer, that's the big worry right there. It's just to do everything possible to guarantee that the writing is up to stuff. And there are lots of ways to do it. And I've been doing that. I've gotten beta readers. I've involved, like yourself, other people, like experts in writing, to help out. And just to, you know, as cheap insurance that I don't put out a dud. And then I've done all my master classes and read tons, all the books on screenwriting, and watched thousands of hours of YouTube videos, and tested it and made changes after doing the focus group beta reading. And I think we polished it to a product. And, you know, one of my secrets to always being able to do outperform people with way more experience or way more talent is time. Is that, you know, if I, on the days where I couldn't draw that as well as other artists, at least I can spend more time troubleshooting it. And the same was with writing. I think a lot of writers, they're doing like 5 books a month, and they're trying to just come up with stories, and they have like 2 weeks to write something. Well, you know, I would take 2 years to write something, and I can kind of outperform them because I'm not maybe naturally as good as them, but I would be willing to work very hard and put in the time, and put in way more time than they do to come out with a product that kind of sits next to their book on the shelf. You know, they might have taken as little as 2 weeks to put that comic out, and, you know, we took 2 years, and it cost about the same. So right. Chances are that, you know, you're in good hands with our book. So
yeah, well, it definitely shows in the work. I can definitely vouch for it. I think you guys are going to do incredible with it. I'm super excited. Definitely, if you're somebody watching, I think you should support, you know, support your artists, support the independents, you know, support Sean's project. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of support. I mean, you have Daniel Wu on it. Yeah. There's going to be so many people that just Daniel Wu alone is a great get and exciting thing. But yeah, I guess we'll kind of wrap it. Oh, go ahead.
I'm just gonna say, like, you know, this is a big experiment whether an artist can survive outside of Marvel and DC. And Marvel and DC is a rat race. I mean, it's a grind. So, you know, we're breaking away for the first time. Everything is riding on it, whether this does well. If it doesn't, then I'm gonna go back into the fold of Marvel if they will have me, and I will toil there until I die, like the rest of my colleagues. So this is a big experiment, and I hope, you know, read the story. If you like it, just, you know, let us know, and spread the word on it. And you know, just want to see whether this works or not. So that's the big thing.
Yeah, well, definitely check it out. Sean, thank you so much for coming on. Maybe you can kind of leave everybody with where they can find you, you know, if they want to follow up, you know, maybe drop the name of the book and the Kickstarter, or your Instagram handle, or your Twitter handle. Where can people find you?
Okay, well, I stay off Twitter because I was told that it'd be good for my career. Instagram is Sean Chen Art, and I post just about every day whatever is on the drawing table, all the latest commissions. And the Kickstarter, the book is called Evermind. And I think that's, if you look up on Kickstarter, you can click follow just to be notified when the project drops. And then hopefully when it does drop, that you support it. So I'm very thankful for your support.
Absolutely. If I can get that link, I'll put it in the description. Everyone can find it easily. But Sean, thanks so much for hopping on the channel today, and best of luck with the project, and see you on the next one.
All right. Thanks a lot for having me.